Ladies and gentlemen, sons and daughters of the Most High God, let me announce something to your spirit today. Your delay is not your denial. Your detour is not your destruction. And what you thought was lost, God is getting ready to restore. I need you to lean in close because the enemy has been whispering lies long enough. He's been trying to convince you that it's too late, you're too far gone, you've wasted too much time, that the damage is too deep. But I came with a word straight from the throne room of heaven. You haven't missed it. God is still on schedule. And you, beloved, are right on time for a divine reset. Let's talk real. You've been through seasons where the locusts came in and stripped everything bare. Your peace, your confidence, your opportunities, your relationships. Maybe you lost years in depression. Maybe you lost time chasing what never loved you back. Maybe you lost yourself trying to please people who never saw your value. You've been looking at the clock, watching the calendar, replaying the years you think you've wasted, whispering to yourself, maybe it's too late. But let me stop you right there. You haven't missed it. Time is not your enemy when you serve a God who stands outside of time and governs it with his word. Delay does not equal denial. Setbacks are not cancellations. Just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And just because others got there first doesn't mean you've been left behind. See, we live in a culture obsessed with the fast lane. If it's not happening now, it feels like it's not happening at all. If you don't have the title, the spouse, the house, the business, the followers, the breakthrough by a certain age, you start to feel like it's over. But let me remind you, God does not operate on your timeline. He operates on his own appointed time. That's the kind of time that can shift things overnight, reverse what seemed irreversible, and redeem what you thought was gone forever. Let's be real. Some of you have been beating yourself up for missing opportunities. You think back on choices you made, paths you didn't take, doors you didn't walk through. You wonder what would have happened if you had prayed more, believed more, moved faster, trusted sooner. But listen to me carefully. God's purpose is never threatened by your mistakes. He is not intimidated by your missteps. You can't ruin what he's already redeemed. Even your delays are woven into his divine plan. Think about Moses. He spent 40 years in the wilderness thinking he was done. God didn't even begin using him until most of us would have been retired and settled. And then there's Sarah, childless, weary, past her prime. But God said, now watch me do what man says can't be done. And Joseph, thrown in a pit, forgotten in a prison, betrayed by family, and still God raised him up to rule in a palace. If they haven't missed it, what makes you think you have? Let me give it to you straight. God is not bound by your age, your resume, your background, or your mistakes. What he started in you, he intends to finish. And the beauty of divine timing is this. It doesn't matter how long it's been dormant. When God says it's time, nothing can stop it. Not your past, not your pain, not your procrastination. You may feel like you're playing catch up, but God is about to accelerate the process. What took others 10 years, God can do in one. What you thought would never come back, God can restore suddenly. He's the kind of God who redeems time, who makes crooked paths straight, who brings dead things back to life. So no, you haven't missed it. That calling is still alive. That purpose still stands. That dream still breathes. Stop scrolling through other people's highlight reels and start believing in what God is doing in your life. The pressure you feel is not proof that you're behind. It's proof that something is about to break loose. You haven't missed your moment. You're just being positioned for it. Because when God says now, everything changes. When God says move, the doors open. When God says go, what was once impossible becomes inevitable. And you, child of God, are not late. You are right on time for what God is about to do in and through you. You've learned how to survive. You've learned how to smile while silently suffering. You've mastered the art of moving on, even while your soul limps from all the places you've been hit. But let me shake you today. God didn't bring you this far just to comfort you in your brokenness. No, he's the God who restores. Not just the God who dries your tears, but the God who gives you back what life, people, time, and the enemy tried to steal. Let's get something straight. Coping is not your calling. God never intended for you to simply patch up the damage and move on with a smaller version of what he promised you. He never asked you to settle for less. But life has a way of convincing us that less is all we're worth after loss. We start shrinking our prayers, adjusting our expectations, playing it safe with what we dare to hope for. But that is not the life God called you to live. That is not the legacy he placed inside you. He is a restorer. And that means he's not finished until what was broken is whole again and better than it was before. Let me ask you a real question. What have you given up on? What dreams did you quietly bury while still showing up in church, still saying all the right things, still smiling through the ache? God saw that. He saw the night you gave up hope. He saw the moment you told yourself, it's okay, it probably wasn't meant for me anyway. And while you were lowering your expectations to survive the disappointment, he was preparing a comeback that doesn't just soothe your pain, it rewrites your story. Because restoration is not about putting things back the way they were. It's about making them better than they ever could have been. That's what makes God different from everything else in this world. People will tell you, move on. Time will tell you, too late. The enemy will tell you, you've lost too much. But God says, I will repay the years, not the days, not the moments, the years. That's a God who's not interested in survival. He's interested in reversal. Some of you have been living in spiritual poverty because you've accepted comfort over restoration. You've accepted a healed wound, but not a restored opportunity. But when God steps in, he doesn't leave things halfway done. If he comforts, he also heals. If he heals, he also rebuilds. If he rebuilds, he also multiplies. Think about Job. He didn't just get his health back, his fortune back, or his family back. He got double. That's restoration. That's what happens when God steps into a story that looks like it's been drained dry. He doesn't just restore to the point of balance. He tips the scale in your favor because he's not trying to get you back to where you were. He's trying to take you where you couldn't have gone without the loss. So stop calling it enough just because you're no longer bleeding. Stop saying you're okay with surviving when God promised you overflow. You've been comforted, but now it's time to be restored. That calling that felt crushed, that hope that faded, that part of you that shut down to protect yourself, God wants it back, and not the broken version. He wants to bring it back with power, with clarity, with favor, with purpose, because he didn't just come to console you after the storm. He came to rebuild what the storm destroyed and add something you never saw coming. You've been mourning over the years you lost, crying over the seasons that were stripped away, looking back at your past like a battlefield filled with missed chances, shattered plans, and silent suffering. But what if I told you the very ground you thought was barren is about to produce a harvest? What if your lost years are not lost at all, but fertile ground for God's glory to be revealed? You see, the enemy wants you to stay stuck in regret. He wants you to believe that the years you spent wandering, the years you spent broken, the years you spent trying to hold it all together were wasted. But God says, I can use every second, every scar, every season. Nothing you've been through is useless in my hands. What looked like destruction is actually preparation. What looked like delay is now the soil where destiny is going to spring forth. Let's talk about the locusts, the ones that came into your life and devoured the fruit of your labor. They came through sickness, through betrayal, through failure, through depression, through divorce, through addiction. You watched whole parts of your life vanish, wondering if anything good could ever come from the wreckage. But here's what God specializes in, bringing life out of places that look dead. You're not walking through a graveyard. You're walking through a garden that's just waiting for the rain. The enemy thought he was burying you in those lost years, but God was actually planting you. And every planted seed eventually pushes through the dirt if it stays in position. So don't mislabel your season. What felt like a grave was really a greenhouse. What looked like a breakdown was setting you up for a breakthrough. Remember Joseph? He spent years in places that looked like loss. His brothers betrayed him. He was sold, falsely accused, imprisoned, and forgotten. By human eyes, those were wasted years. Time he could have been thriving, building, becoming. But from heaven's perspective, those were the most productive years of his life. Because in the pit, God was planting humility. In the prison, God was planting wisdom. In the silence, God was planting strength. And when the time came, the harvest was so great, he couldn't even contain it. He had to bless a whole nation. That's what God wants to do with your lost years. He doesn't just want to restore you to the place you were before the loss. He wants to take you to a place you could never have reached without it. Because there's something about walking through pain that gives your praise a different weight. There's something about surviving storms that makes your worship real. There's something about losing everything and still standing that makes you dangerous to the enemy. You've been thinking that because you lost time, you're behind. But in God's kingdom, the back of the line is often the place of preparation for the front. The last shall be first. The forgotten shall be favored. The rejected shall be raised up. You haven't missed your moment. You've been maturing in it. Quietly, silently, powerfully. And now God is about to water every dry place. Rain is coming. Restoration is coming. But not just so you can say, I made it. So you can say, look what the Lord has done with what I thought was gone. Your story isn't over. It's about to burst forth with fruit. And the ground that once held your brokenness is about to hold your testimony, because nothing grows without dirt. And God has been using every piece of your past as seed for your future. There's something powerful about pain when it's placed in the hands of God. But let's be honest, most of us don't see it that way at first. Pain feels like punishment. It feels like rejection. It feels like failure wrapped in silence. You ask yourself, why did I have to go through this? Why me? Why now? And when the answers don't come quickly, you start to believe the lie that pain means it's over, that the dream died when the heart broke, that the calling expired when the storm came. But here's the truth that breaks chains. Pain has a purpose, and it's not the end of your story. You didn't survive all of that just to be left in the rubble. You didn't cry those tears, walk through those dark nights, fight through anxiety, wrestle through depression, or crawl through disappointment just to remain broken. God doesn't waste pain. He never has. In fact, pain is often the very platform he uses to launch you into purpose.
The very thing you thought disqualified you is the thing God will use to qualify you for what's next. Let me tell you something that will shift your entire perspective. Pain is not just what you feel, it's what God uses to reveal. It reveals what's real. It reveals what needs healing. It reveals who's for you, who's not, and what you've been holding on to that he's been trying to strip away. Pain has a way of peeling back the surface and exposing what's been hidden in the dark corners of your soul. Not to shame you, but to free you. Think about it. Some of your strongest moments came right after your most painful ones. You found your voice after someone tried to silence it. You found your strength after the weight nearly crushed you. You found your calling after everything familiar fell apart. That wasn't coincidence. That was God taking what the enemy meant for evil and flipping it into fuel for your future. Look at Jesus. The pain of the cross wasn't the end. It was the door to resurrection. Glory came through agony. Victory came through suffering. Hope came through heartbreak. And if that's the path the Son of God walked to fulfill his purpose, don't be surprised when your own purpose has to be pressed through pain. You're not being punished. You're being purified. You're not being forgotten, you're being forged in fire. There's something about the valley that builds a voice of power. There's something about pressure that births anointing. The oil doesn't flow without crushing. And what you've been through, those sleepless nights, that season of silence, the betrayal, the disappointment, the battle in your mind, it's producing something in you that comfort never could. You see, anybody could sing on the mountain, but real worship is born in the wilderness. Real faith is proven in the fire. Real identity is found in the furnace, not the spotlight. And when you come out of it, and you will come out, you won't just be restored, you'll be transformed. You'll have a different kind of fire in your eyes, a deeper kind of strength in your voice, a clearer kind of vision in your spirit. Because pain doesn't just shape your story, it shapes your authority. The people you're called to reach won't be moved by your perfection. They'll be moved by your process. They'll find healing in the fact that you've been where they are and made it. That your scars didn't steal your song. That your wounds didn't silence your witness. That your pain didn't end your story, it empowered your mission. Because in God's hands, pain is never wasted. It becomes the proof of your purpose. It becomes the soil where your future grows. It becomes the tool that carves out the deeper well in your soul. The place where power, empathy, and glory meet. You thought it was over. You buried the dream. You closed the book. You said maybe it just wasn't meant to be. You tried to move on, convinced that what you carried was just a moment, a phase, a hope that didn't work out. But I came to wake something up in you. Don't bury it, plant it again. What you called dead, God is calling dormant. What you gave up on, God is about to raise up. What died in your hands can still rise in his. There's a difference between burial and planting, but they look the same at first. Both involve placing something in the ground. Both involve darkness. Both require letting go, but one leads to death and the other leads to multiplication. And too many of us have buried what God only intended to plant. We thought the silence meant rejection. We thought the delay meant denial. But God wasn't done. He was preparing the soil. He was making room for something deeper, stronger, more fruitful. That idea, that vision, that ministry, that business, that calling, it wasn't foolish. It wasn't random. It was a seed. And maybe the first time you planted it, the conditions weren't right. Maybe you weren't ready yet. Maybe your faith hadn't been tested yet. Maybe the people around you couldn't handle the weight of your purpose. So God let it fall. He let it hit the ground, not to destroy it, but to plant it in better soil. And now he's saying, try again. Not in your own strength, not with the same mindset, not with the same fears, but with a new fire. Because this time, you're not planting out of desperation. You're planting from a place of understanding. This time, you're not chasing validation. You're moving from revelation. You know now that the results are not your responsibility. The obedience is. And obedience always opens the door to overflow. There's something powerful that happens when you decide to sow again. When you choose to believe again. When you dare to speak life over dry bones. Not because you see them moving, but because you know who your God is. That's when things shift. That's when faith multiplies. That's when heaven breathes on what looked impossible and says, live. Don't let past disappointment talk you out of future destiny. Yes, you've tried before. Yes, it hurt. Yes, it didn't work the way you hoped. But just because it didn't happen then doesn't mean it won't happen now. Timing matters. Maturity matters. Alignment matters. And sometimes God has to let the seed break before it can bloom. Because what's inside you can't grow in shallow soil. This time the roots are going to run deeper. This time the fruit will last longer. This time the impact will be greater. Not just for you, but for everyone connected to your obedience. People are waiting on the other side of your yes. People you haven't met yet. People who need your story, your gift, your breakthrough, your voice. So don't let fear keep you from the field. It's planting season. You've been mourning the grave of a dream when you should have been preparing for harvest. You've been pacing the floor, wondering why nothing changed when God's been waiting for you to plant again in faith. Faith is the water. Trust is the sunlight. The word is the soil. And your obedience is the seed. You've been walking around holding the very thing that was meant to be sown. Stop carrying what God called you to release. Stop guarding what was meant to grow. Stop letting the past dictate the future of what God can still do through you, because the power was never in the seed alone. It was always in your willingness to plant it again. There comes a point in your journey when God won't let you stay where you are anymore, not because he's punishing you, but because he's positioning you. You feel the discomfort, you feel the shift, you feel the tension between where you've been and where he's calling you to go. And you've been asking God, what's happening to me? Let me tell you, you're not being abandoned, you're being aligned. This is your season of divine repositioning. Everything that once felt comfortable is starting to stretch. What used to satisfy you doesn't anymore. The places you once fit no longer feel like home. The conversations feel different. The relationships feel tested. The silence feels louder. That's not confusion, it's clarity. It's God loosening your grip from what's behind so he can launch you into what's ahead. He's not pushing you out, he's pulling you up. This is where the real tension lies. You're still standing in a place you've outgrown. Spiritually, emotionally, even physically, God is calling you higher. But higher means unfamiliar. Higher means risk. Higher means leaving behind the false security of stuck places. And that's hard, because we often confuse comfort with peace. But comfort can keep you confined. Peace, however, comes from knowing you're in alignment with God's purpose, even if it means walking into the unknown. You've been praying for change, but when change starts knocking, fear tries to answer the door. You ask for growth, but when pruning comes, you want to run. But pruning isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's God cutting away what no longer produces fruit so that more can grow. And what's being cut might feel essential, but trust this, God never removes what you'll need for your next level. He only removes what will weigh you down. Think about Abraham. God told him to go and didn't even tell him where. Just go. Leave everything familiar. Leave everything comfortable. Leave everyone who can't walk with you into the promise. And Abraham obeyed, not because he understood, but because he trusted. That's where you are. God is calling you to move, not with full clarity, but with full faith. You won't have all the answers, but you will have the direction. Because when God is repositioning you, he often creates holy disruption. Not chaos, but divine shaking. Things fall apart not to break you, but to build something new in you. Doors close to show you where you were never meant to stay. People walk away so the right ones can walk in. Sometimes the pain is simply a push. And here's the part we don't talk about enough. Repositioning always feels like loss before it looks like gain. You might feel like everything's being stripped away, like you're being emptied, like you're losing pieces of yourself. But in reality, you're being refined. God is pulling you out of places you prayed to be delivered from. But now that the deliverance is here, you're hesitating because of how unfamiliar freedom feels. Let me encourage you. It's not falling apart. It's falling into place. The relationships that ended, alignment. The job you lost, direction. The opportunity that didn't open, protection. You thought it was rejection, but heaven was rearranging the pieces for a bigger picture. Because what's coming next can't be built on the old structure. New wine requires new wineskins. So if things feel uncertain, it's because you're in the hallway between what was and what will be. That space is sacred. It's where God breaks, molds, stretches, and shapes. It's uncomfortable. It's unfamiliar, but it's necessary, because where he's taking you requires a new mindset, a new posture, a new discipline, a new capacity. You can't step into your next chapter holding on to the last one. God is saying, lift your head, loosen your grip, trust my leading. You're not being displaced, you're being upgraded. And this divine repositioning is not just for your benefit. It's for everyone who's going to encounter the version of you that finally said yes to the shift.